In this one, I'm going to give a stab to trying to help understand Ecm motors. And so I have some comparisons here. Here's a PSC motor. Here's an Ecm motor. Here's a carburetor. And here's a fuel injector. Now, I don't have all the fuel injection parts. I'm not going to put all of them up there, but it's representative of fuel injection. Okay. I would compare the carburetor for the gasoline engine to the PSC motor and the injection system in an automobile to the Ecm. So, what are the similarities? A carburetor, this is an old AFB off of Pontiac in the middle 60s. A carburetor does all the fuel metering all by itself. The fuel's put into it, the vacuum is provided by the engine, and the amount of vacuum, the amount of airflow coming through determines how much fuel goes into it. Now obviously that's a little simplified. It is a little more complicated than that. But this one device that's not electronics, not anything, does it all. Okay. The PSC motor is similar to this because what it does is it runs at one speed. Now, I know you're going to say, no, it doesn't, but we'll talk about that. This is a synchronous motor, not counting for slip. If I have 60 cycles per second in my AC power, this thing is going to travel at a specific speed. Okay? Depending on the number of poles are in the motor. The only way you can change that is start putting impedance into some of the widenings. And that's what the speed wires are for. Okay, this is a multi-speed motor. And of course it has a capacitor with it. That's the only electronic device in this motor. This motor is a synchronous motor when it's on high speed. Lower speeds, it's not so synchronous. Let's look at the fuel injector. Fuel injector is part of the, quote, new cars. Ain't seen a carburetor in a car for a long time. They developed fuel injection for automobiles in the 80s. It took quite a while for it to be really effective. There were quite a few failures, electronic failures and the like, for quite a while. But it required a control system in order to operate. You couldn't just run this thing. Now, there were mechanical fuel injection used in diesels, used in some World War II aircraft, but it would not work well in an automobile, especially a gasoline-powered automobile. So they had to make some changes to make it viable for automobiles. And what they ended up with is a control system that controlled how long the injector was on and when exactly it injected fuel and on and on. There was all kinds of things that gave this thing feedback to tell it when and how much fuel to put in. But it was all outside of the injection system. It was all electronics that were controlling it. Well, with the Ecm motor, it's kind of the same thing. The motor itself is somewhat similar in design to this. And in fact, if I were to take this motor and instead of running it on 60 cycles a second, now most people say hertz, I'm saying cycles per second because it's the number of AC cycles that happen per second. Positive, 0, negative, 0. Okay? If I ran this on, say, instead of 60 cycles per second, I ran it on 30 cycles per second, it would go half speed. And in fact, there are some motors set up to be controlled that way. But most of them are like this. There's more control of the speed and the torque with this type of motor. Okay, this motor being very similar to this one, except in some of the design inside, is a variable speed motor. It can vary its speed an awful lot. Well, you say, I can vary the speed with this thing. But you lose efficiency when you do. When this thing's running at full speed, it's fairly efficient. You run it at one of the lower speeds and the efficiency drops pretty dramatically. I did a video on that. I'll link it in the back of this thing. This runs fairly close to the same efficiency as this one. I know they all say it's higher. I didn't find them to be a lot higher than what I tested. But if I'm running high speed on this and high speed on this, the draw isn't that much different. But if I draw on or if I lower the speed of this thing, it's amazing. It drops dramatically. Its efficiency stays high, but its speed goes low. So that's what we were looking for. Variable speed in motors. So this was the design that we came up with to do those variable speeds. And at what it does, it's very good. And you say, well, yeah, but it's got this thing. God, this thing gives us all kinds of trouble. Well, they're actually settling down pretty well now. But they had some problems with these. MOSFETs failed. One of the most common one was their thermistor failed, which that was fixable. But nobody wanted to tell you it was fixable, so you throw these things away. Anyway, because all the control is outside, it's in here. This is a simple part of the motor, and this is the complex part. It's the same thing as fuel injection. Now, fuel-injected cars get better fuel economy than carbureted cars. I used to live in Southern California. I had this thing on a big slobbering V8. And I lived up in the desert. And when I went to start that thing when it was hot, you know, I stopped at a parking lot for something, come back out 15, 20 minutes. If I did not open that throttle wide open, that car would not start. Reason being, the gasoline was boiling in it and bubbling down into the system. And these things, they didn't call them toilets for nothing. There were a lot of times they fed way too much fuel, didn't mix it well, and were generally a pain in the tail end. So were these, but these things actually gave better fuel economy because they had more precise fuel delivery. And this does better because it has more precise control of speed. Now, I'm going to do another video about these motors and try to give you an idea of just how they work inside and what makes them work. Where this motor, everything was designed at the factory in, we'll call it hardwired, because there was no electronics other than a capacitor, which was external. You just designed this thing, set it up, and off it went. This thing was entirely different because this had to be designed, and this has to control this to make efficient low-speed operation. Okay, that's it on this one.